There are many modalities. Our friends from Veterans Affairs Canada also noted that. Probably more than we have the capacity to manage. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're not a valuable approach. And going back to Tim's point, not everything works for everybody, but if it works and it's repeatable and it's worth tracking, maybe we learn a little bit more about it. Recognizing that research and proof is important. The concept of do no harm is kind of important too, but that shouldn't translate into do nothing new. Some modalities are just plain comfortable, and maybe there's just a different way to look at some of this. And that's why I brought Atholl and Karen today, to let them help you explore what else is out there. And so Atholl and I have known each other quite a while. He's, well, he knows this place and has been a friend of the CF for very many years. Does work now in his clinic in View Royal for military, RCMP, police forces, and oh yes, a few civilians too, I understand. And maybe we'll get you to touch on that. Atholl, over to you.
Thank you very much for the invitation from the Legion, Admiral Gerard, and Royal Roads, of course. I'm going to talk today a little bit about virtual reality therapy, first of all, and then follow it up by an emphasis on what is now known as neurofeedback, or EEG biofeedback. And I've got a few things I would like to emphasize as we go down, but just in 10 seconds or so, my own background was in the RCAF, and as of a couple of months ago, it still is in the RCAF, because we went back to being the RCAF, which was kind of nice. And I started out, and there's three things I want to mention from this slide. The first is the top line, which says tactical coordinator with, and that was on the Argus, chasing Russian Soviet submarines around the Atlantic. And that's one of the things that has implications for today's talk, because the same technology that we used to find and submarines in the Atlantic is now applied to EEG, known as quantitative EEG. So the same technology I was using in 1966, we're now using on the brain in 2012, which is kind of nice. The next item on this slide is 442 Squadron experience. A few years later, I find myself on the search and rescue unit. By this time, I was doing a bachelor's degree in psychology. And even then, I began to think, some of the things that some of our squadron members are going through have to have an effect. I'm talking about the SARTECs, the rescue specialists who jumped out into the crash sites where there was terrible carnage that they were exposed to on a very, very regular basis. And I thought, you know, this is going to have some effects. And sure enough, years later, when I'm in my own private practice, I've since assessed and diagnosed 5 SARTECs with PTSD. So it came home. That little insight turned out to be true. The last thing on here, of course, is the second bottom one. I finished my doctorate, and then the military's trying to decide what to do with a navigator with a PhD in psychology, so I ended up here at Royal Roads teaching started out teaching the military leadership program, but we were asked, and we were given permission to develop a degree in military psychology. So we did that, and I looked after that for a bunch of years. And then I was at the end of my tour, so I hired myself as a civilian to continue on for a few more years. And we ran the military degree, the military psychology degree, where we looked at things like PTSD and all the other aspects of psychology that could apply to the military. Since then, private practice, since 1989, I guess, somewhere around there. And the practice has grown. And now if you'll see in your packages, and I'm only going to spend a minute on this because this is not why I'm here. You'll see there's a packet of slides. There's more slides in your packet that I have on here, because I thought I was going to be talking for an hour. Turned out it was for half an hour, so chopped back a few. There's also we also have programs which run out of the practice. We were a part of the development side. After I left the military, I ended up doing the psychological services over at the military hospital, which was great. And then that developed into 2 full-time positions, so the practice was able to develop on that. Now the military has its own in-house psychologist, and that is great also. And so everything is well on its way. But while we were there, we were able to develop with the Ottawa Clinic a 5-day psychoeducational program, which we still run 4 times a year. It's actually 6 days, because the 6th day is we invite the families in, and it's to tell people what PTSD is. It's not a treatment program. We do a lot of individual therapy, and we also have a PTSD Plus treatment program run by Tamara Goranson, Dr. Tamara Goranson. Some of you may have been involved with that. And that goes, the one started today, actually. We try and run that about twice a year. And so there's lots of individual therapy. The people who come to our groups or referrals from Veterans Affairs, RCMP, D&D not so much now because they have their own in-house stuff. Other police forces are using the facilities, our services now. So it's great to see this, this thing grow. And my job now is not so much as a clinician. I'm getting to be the, well, I'm not getting to be the old guy. I am the bloody old guy. So I get to sit and do nothing except have fun looking at new therapeutic modalities, which are what we're going to look at now this afternoon. I want to emphasize that the 2 that I'm going to point out to you are based on sound science, and they are based on solid, ongoing research. Just talked about those things. They are, and I want to emphasize this again, that these two modalities, which I'm going to talk about, are adjuncts to the regular type of therapy. So we are sort of grounded in cognitive behavior therapy, which means things like systematic desensitization and exposure therapy, which is on the next slide. And so these are adjuncts to what are the standard treatment protocols. So I want you to note that virtual reality therapy is not named that. It's a problem on the slide there. It's virtual reality exposure therapy. It is exposure, as described by Edna Foer, earlier today mentioned, John Briere, and others. And generally in therapy, we're doing covert exposure, which means we're imagining the PTSD in a graduated format, or in vivo, which is real life, but it's hard to go back to Afghanistan. I know General Dallaire went back to Rwanda to expose himself in real life to what had caused him his problems. However, virtual reality is almost as effective as the real stuff. It's got to be gradual, very, very gradual. So it is nothing more than exposure, nothing more than a graduated exposure therapy. I'm not going to show the movie because there's some triggers on there, I think, and I think we've been through that a bit today. The movie is on our website, which is listed. You can click it and you can watch it. And I do have a couple of pictures which are involved. This is one of the scenes. That's Afghanistan. They added some mountains, and so that's Iraq. And in this scene, the person is driving down the road, and they can control the speed they're driving down the road. The therapist can then expose them to whatever hierarchy we want them to see. They're in a 3D headset, by the way, and they can look around and all the scene changes. They can look up, they can look down, they can look at the person next to them. We can make the vehicle in front blow up. We can have insurgents coming out. We can have IEDs. Tim mentioned this morning the business about very hard to find a road and have something blow up and all that kind of stuff. We can do just that. We have a smell machine. It's linked to a smell machine which puts out the odors of cordite and burning rubber and things like that. So it's a very powerful exposure mechanism. That's driver looking, and this person can be injured, and he gets kind of covered in blood and whatnot. So again, that's why we're not going to show it this afternoon. A few mountains in the back to make it look like Afghanistan. And there is just another scene from one of the roads. There's a patrol scene, a city scene. The person is doing a patrol down the road, and ambulances are getting blown up. We did show this. I'll just let that settle down. I was asked to demonstrate it to one of our PTSD groups, and I was very proud of this thing. We just got it, and so I turned it on, and instantly I triggered. The person wasn't in the headset. They were watching what I was seeing on the screen because I'm monitoring it on the screen, and the thing that triggered him, it was the sound of a wailing prayer call, and it just blew him away. So I don't demonstrate it anymore. At least not to people who I know have got PTSD. This is just 2 slides of a bit of research that was done in the States by the US forces who use it a lot. This is the CAPS, which many of the clinicians are aware of, and the severity scale after 4 sessions went down significantly, as you can see. Another one, the military checklist. Again, improvements in very few sessions. And success in 16, there was 4 failures on this one. Again, I didn't do this research. It was done by the US military. And these are the ongoing research. This is ongoing research. It's underway right now. So there's randomized control trials which are underway. So we hope that they will be out soon. That is, and there's a handout in the thing. It's called rationale for using virtual reality exposure therapy for anxiety disorders, because not only do we have virtual Iraq and virtual Afghanistan, we have fear of flying, so we can take people up flying into bad weather, and there's a seat which rumbles happily away, and we can make thunder go. We can really give somebody a flight phobia if they don't have one. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what I really came here to talk about, and that is quantitative EEG, which is the assessment of abnormal EEG, and then the neurofeedback, or the EEG biofeedback, which follows on from that. The history of QEEG, well, electrical activity was first published in the brain was first published in 1929. It was known before that. And what we do is, for the assessment, we have a bunch of caps, different sized heads. The person wears it. There's 19 sensors, just like it would be if you go into the hospital. And so we're measuring the EEG of the brain. Simple as that. And that's what an EEG looks like if you go to the hospital. And and this would be the trace on a paper or a computer screen. And if you just kind of look from, say, that point where my arrow is over to here, you'll see about 9 oscillations. And so this is what the neurologists who are encephalographers are looking at. And this is all they get because they aren't using the quantitative EEG. And this is very good for identifying sleep disorders and epileptic seizure activity. But there's so much information on here that is not available unless you go to the next step, which I'm going to do. Hopefully. That one. So now we've got the computer screen that we are looking at when we're doing the identification of what we're going to see. First of all, on the big panel, we have the same as I gave you before, except they're color-coded. On the right-hand panels, there's a bunch of lines, which I'm going to explain in a second. Those color codes all are the same as the ones over here. So there's a red one in there somewhere, which is the top one on the big left panel. Across the bottom, you'll see black lines and red lines. All that is before we use this for analysis, we've got to do the artifacting. We get EMG if somebody blinks their eyes. We've got to get rid of that because that's not a brainwave. And so we take out all the stuff that isn't relevant, and we're left with we need about 1 minute to 2 minutes of good EEG, and that's represented by the red line across the bottom red line right there. So now I'm just going to pick one of these, because it's hopefully. There. So now we've got, I've just selected one of them. The computer does this, and this is just so we can explain it. So now we've got the raw EEG in the big panel on the left. We've got these 2 panels on the right. What the top right one is doing is it is separating the different frequencies that are in here. Now I'm going to go back to 405 squadron. When we were fighting submarines, we used to chuck sonobuoys in the water, quite a few of them, and then and the sound was transmitted to the aircraft. It's the same as sonar in a ship. And then on the aircraft, it would split out. It would take the raw sound and then split out the different frequencies. Each ship or type of ship in the water had a different sound signature. So we could say that's a Gulf submarine belonging to the Soviets, and so we'd follow that one around for about 6 months, handing off to different aircraft, although the Argus stayed up for about 18 hours. Anyway, so we were able to do that. We could identify what kind of vessel was in the water by the sound signature, by separating the raw sound into different frequencies. The other thing I want you just to remember as we go on is that if you go to a sports stadium and there's an announcement, you can hear sound coming from this speaker at a different time than when it comes to the one in front of you. Two reasons: there's distance involved, but there's also phase difference. The sound is coming in out of phase from each of the different speakers. And I'm going to come back to that concept in a little while. But coming back to the top screen here then, what that has done, finding my arrow, is putting where the arrow is. That means that at 5 cycles per second, and the frequencies we're interested in the brain are from 0 to 30. So at 5 cycles per second, if I put my cursor, say, there, and look to the y-axis, I can't point at the same time, that's the up-down axis. When I read across, it's about 7 microvolts squared. The brain electricity is measured in microvolts, and we call power microvolts squared. So we got about 7 microvolts squared, and where the red stuff came up on the left of the big screen, it tells us what it is, 7.82 microvolts squared. So now if I run my thing across, I can see what the power is at all of the different frequencies that make up the brain's electrical activity. It's called fast Fourier analysis. That's all it is. There's nothing we've done yet that's kind of voodoo. We've just used science to identify the frequencies within each EEG signal. At the bottom, we do something else. If you think to IQ, which we all know about, we know that the mean IQ in North America is 100. If you've got an IQ of 100, you are average. And when they do the normative data, they take a whole bunch of people, measure IQs, create a bell curve, work out on the bell curve what a standard deviation is, and a standard deviation includes 68% of the people. And for IQ, one standard deviation is 15, so from 85 to 115 is sort of the normal range. One standard deviation outside on each side of the mean. And so we do the same thing here. It's important to realize that just with IQ, if you've got an IQ like the Admiral of about 160 or something, as somebody said once, but if it was an IQ of 130, that's in the superior range. So in other words, if you've got a very high IQ, that's good. Usually that's good anyway. And if so, just because something is outside of a normal range in EEG doesn't mean there's something wrong. It means there's something unusual, but it might be good. A concert pianist or a quarterback will have things which are out of the normal range because they're so highly developed. So when we don't want to do neurofeedback and turn a concert pianist into me, for God's sake, or a quarterback into somebody who can't play anymore. So when people are doing neurofeedback without any training or without any analysis, they can be doing damage because they can train somebody back to normal when they were excellent before. So now we've got, on this one down here on the bottom screen, we can sort of stroll along, and we'll notice at the bottom on this particular wave, we've got some very high power, 5, 6 standard deviations above the mean. There's something going on there, so we need to know what that is. And it goes all, and this is important. This particular person, I didn't use anyone from our clinic, so confidentiality reasons.
You did. You didn't ask.
Hunter had an accident, and his frontal lobes got a little bit damaged not too long ago. No wonder, Hunter. No wonder. Anyway, this is a person who came from this person lives somewhere in the States, so we're not going to betray any confidentialities. This person got hit. He did get hit on the right parietal region. That's sort of somewhere around here with a baseball bat, and we see that there's some high power right there. 3 standard deviations above the mean. So now going back to putting all of this stuff on, not just the one, we see that this high power is around here, around 5 or 6 hertz, cycles per second, hertz, and it's significantly high. We can look at all this, and this is where the thing you probably hear about, a little more about. We'll just make sure we're going to select the right stuff. The one. So now we're going to actually generate some brain maps so we can just see what I said a little more clearly. Go down to the stuff that matters. So here we'll see now everything that's at 1 hertz, the power distribution. So we can see all that high power at 1 hertz It's across most of the brain. Little less here, comes up again here at 5 and 6 hertz, and that was that second blip on the lower left panel, lower right panel that we saw before. So this is where the person was actually injured. Another thing that there's millions of metrics that we can look at, but I'm just going to look at a couple of important ones. This is called coherence. Coherence is how one part of the brain speaks to another part of the brain. When you look out your environment and you see a face, it's being processed at the front, the information shoved to the visual memory banks, and it's compared to the visual memory banks, and you either recognize the person or it's a stranger. And so if there's links that are broken or damaged, then that's not going to happen. And Rakesh was talking about the links between the limbic system, the amygdala, and other areas. These are the sort of things that we need to consider when we're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. So those are the maps we generate.
Atholl, do you want to just maybe explain the color coding on that?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Understand that?
I will do that. You'll see the bar graph, the bars at the bottom. 0 is green. That's 0 standard deviations. That's like an IQ of 100. That's right in the middle. That's normal. When you go out to the outsides, the red is 3 standard deviations and more above where it's supposed to be, above the mean. And if it was dark blue, it would be 3 standard deviations below. Now, we are not concerned particularly about whether something is low or high. When we get into the real finer points, we are, but we're looking for things which are abnormal. That's all we're looking for at this point in time. So thanks for that, Greg. I should have said that. So we can do something else. Remember I talked about Bill Gates should make this easier. I talked about listening to sounds in the stadium. So now what we can do, if you remember, going back to my submarine analogy, we could localize the submarine for 2 ways. If the noise was louder at this sonobuoy than this sonobuoy, then it was closer to this sonobuoy than that sonobuoy. We could, if the phase differences were in a certain relationship, then that helped us to localize it as well. Now, in EEG, without going into the mathematics of it, vectors can be calculated from the sites, from the 19 sites at 90 degrees to the skull. And where they intersect, just like taking a navigational fix at sea or in space, it will then identify the source, not just at the surface now, at the source of the current source, the current sources that have been reflected at the surface. So now, if we've got some abnormal stuff, we know where in the brain it's coming from. So in this case, if we go, we'll just take a look at moving this number up to 5 and 6 and 7. 6 was where these are hertz in this little box there, so that's 6 cycles per second. That's where the high stuff was on the other maps. And now I can drag my cursor over here and find out where that is. That is called Broadman Area 40. Now, von Broadman was a guy who lived at the beginning of the century, and he identified the brain, divided the brain up into functional areas. Where was the memory functions? Where was the attention functions? Where were all the things in the brain? So now all we know at this point is that we've got a problem with high power, at least we've got high power, in Broadman Area 40, and that was where the guy got hit with a baseball bat. So just moving from that for a moment, fortunately, we don't have to remember where all these Broadman areas are, because they're nice little interactive atlases, and this is the brain. These are the Broadman areas which have stood the test of time. They're still used today. There's other coordinates like telluric coordinates, but this is Broadman Area 40. So we click Broadman Area 40, and this is what's going on in Broadman Area 40. Language stuff, memory stuff, motor stuff. And what we've already done before we did this analysis, we've had an interview with this gentleman, and we've said, what are your symptoms? Or we've done neuropsychological testing, and we've identified the symptoms. So we are looking for abnormal areas of functioning in the brain, abnormal electrical activity, which are consistent with the symptoms that he has told us. Then we're not training down some concert pianist's brilliance back down to normal. We're heading at the things which are problematic, which we've identified as problematic. And so now we know the Broadman areas which we want to identify. I'm just going to go back to my PowerPoint to see what I've missed before we give you a demonstration. Go to the microvolts squared were very important units. Power, we talked about coherence. Should just mention this briefly. Reduced coherence, they were blue lines because we need an ideal coherence, and that has got a normative database, so we could say that's where it should be. It's too high here, it's too low there. Reduced coherence reflects this reduced connectivity between two sites. And that is manifested in behaviors or illnesses or diseases or DSM-4 stuff as things like obsessiveness. The person cannot get away from what they're thinking. Sorry, I'm talking about elevated coherence here. That's the red lines. So there's too much connectivity. The person cannot shift from a given thought. They get stuck. So obsessive-compulsive disorders might be seen to fall into elevated coherence. Reduced coherence, hypocoherence, reflects too little connectivity, too little chatter going on between the two areas, two specific areas of the brain. And that might be seen in things like attention disorders. The person cannot focus long enough. That's because this part of the brain isn't hanging on to this part of the brain long enough. And it's all to do with phase, which we don't have time to talk about today. So it's a very basic description of that. So there's just Broadman areas. You've got the slide. If you want to play with it, you can download it and have a look at it yourself. This is an important concept because we're going to get into a demonstration in about 2 seconds, and the demonstration will last about 3 minutes, I hope. Operant conditioning is why neurofeedback works. It's operant conditioning of the brain. This was Eric Kandel in 2006 got a Nobel Prize for this work because when you operantly condition the brain, new synapses develop. This is all the new neuroplasticity literature, which we've heard about all over the place. So we're developing new synapses. So that means we can develop new routes from point A to point B. We can do all kinds of things if we operantly condition the brain. Nobel Prize to show that that could be done. It kind of explains a little bit about why people get gambling addictions. They're operantly conditioning their brain. So there's a physiological change in their brain. Pornography addictions. Anything which is pleasurable creates a change in the brain if you keep doing it often enough. So what we're going to do in neurofeedback is operantly condition the brain to get some of these power values back to normal, to get the coherences in the normal range. We're going to have a demonstration, but I'm just going to give you 3 little brain maps of before and afters. This is not randomized controlled studies. This is just before and after of people we have seen. This was a person who was in a high-powered executive position, and he'd been off work for, I think, about 6 months by the time he came to see us. And the initial brain maps, and his main complaint, he'd been in bed for a long time because of depression. So we did the maps, identified areas of the brain which are consistent with depression, did the training, and this was, and on the right-hand side is where it was after, I think, that's the hertz from 21 to 30. These are all individual hertz, remember, 1, 2, 3, etc. And we're talking to him every week. We're doing this in the context of regular therapy. I keep meaning to emphasize that. This is not standalone. This is in the context of CBT. And so his Beck depression inventory went down after, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sessions following the first assessment one. And his anxiety went down a bit. Now he said, why don't I get rid of all of that red? And I said, how are you feeling? He said, I'm feeling really good. And I said, well, why do you want to get rid of it then? Kind of like the concert pianist. I said, what makes you really good at your job? He said, well, I kind of obsess a little bit, and I get things done and all of that stuff. So I said, you want to keep on doing that? Yes. Well, let's just leave well enough alone. You're fine. And so the next one was a young person who had trouble with anxiety to do with exams, final law exams, and she was terrified she was going to waste a whole bunch of years by failing this thing. So I think she came in for about 5 sessions. We'll see in a minute. She had anxiety in this particular, whatever that says, 11 hertz in that sort of frontal central region. So we gave her training. That was the bottom row. And that's her depression. She was very depressed about it. Depression scores went down. Anxiety scores went down. This is a person who has PTSD. We're still in the middle of doing this one. All low power, all the blue stuff on the left, starting to come back up again. Person starting to engage in life again. And now I will get going, Megan, and we're going to give you a quick demonstration of actual neurofeedback. We do hope that the tech stuff works. So now we've put the cap on the person. This is simulated data. We've got the cap on the person running along, and so we're now just taking, and I'm going to stand over here and sort of point out on some screen or another what we're going to do. So now we've got the person sitting, the data is coming in, we're going to do the feedback, and these are all the Broadman areas down here. That's all of them. Now previously, we've taken what's called a symptom checklist. That's this thing down here. These are the areas of the brain which were identified as being abnormal. That doesn't mean bad, it just means abnormal. And so on the, so now they've been transferred to this mismatch column. Now we're going to treat attention deficit, so Megan's just going to trigger that. We're just going to tick that off and give a severity rating of about 4. So now these are the areas of the brain which are, these are the areas of the brain, I forget there's 2 screens, which are part of the attention network. Rakesh, you talked about networks before. These are the areas associated with attention. Now before we go on and do it, Megan, if you could just click that one there. There's different ways of looking at symptoms. I'm giving this for the military medical folks. If you go down to the bottom, these are the ones which have been now linked to PTSD. So these, if I clicked something there, it would cover all of the areas which have been associated with hyperarousal. And if you're in the packets, you'll see a handout from the Fort Campbell project in the States. Everyone who's coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan, is going through a massive program with Quantitative Eeg, which is what we just described before. This process using Loretta, which is what I described at the end of where the kind of brain slices were, and they're going through the normal kinds of therapy. So now we'll go back to our attention one at the top, and so now we're going to train everything that's outside of 3 standard deviations. We're going to track it. The person will get positive feedback, which we'll show in a minute, when all of the metrics which are outside are moving towards 0. In other words, coming into the normal zone. The feedback will stop when it's going out. Because the feedback is pleasant for the person, that's the operant conditioning. So now if we'll just get Megan to set the operant conditioning thing going, and I'll describe what kinds of. Okay, it'll take a second or 2 to settle down, hopefully. So if you I wonder if we could just turn the volume down as far, just so I can talk. Oh, I should have had this thing. Hello? That's fine. So what's going on now is, thanks, what's going on now is the person is actually watching a movie. We can play any movie. They can bring in their favorite movie and watch a movie, or just music. They can listen to their favorite music. When they're watching their favorite movie, and for kids, we put on kids' movies, then the movie will fade out and the sound will go down when the metrics are not moving towards 0. When they're moving towards 0, the sound comes on and the movie comes on. So you have to do nothing. The brain is being operantly conditioned, according to Eric Kandel, by watching the movie. And the results on 2 or 3 of the people I showed you, and we haven't had anyone who hasn't had some benefit. We've probably got about 25 people coming in a week for this right now. So you can see the movie, which is on there. It's fading in and out. There's no operant conditioning being done because it's not attached to anyone's head. It's just running through some simulated data. So that is neurofeedback, which is always based on quantitative EEG assessment. It's absolutely essential that be done. Otherwise, you can be treating symptoms which are not present. Another important thing is that when the brain gets injured, it develops new roots on its own, compensatory mechanisms. They're not as efficient. That's why people with MTBI have great fatigue, because the brain is working harder to do the same thing. What we don't want to do is train away the compensatory systems before we fix the other ones. And so it's important to pick the symptom you want to do. In this case, it was attention, train that. Then pick the next one you want to train, and train that. We don't do 2 at a time. We just do 1 at a time. And the number of sessions which you saw on those earlier slides were about 6 or 8. And then things started to come on. We are so pleased with Loretta, because we used to, with surface neurofeedback, we used to take about 20 and 30. So now it seems to be going a lot faster, and there's a lot of research and a lot of workshops going on south of the border presenting the data. Have I finished?
I think so.
Okay, let me just put that down and see if I've got anything else. I don't think so. Thought I had an hour to do this. I'll just make sure there's nothing on. I think I'm all done. They think the PowerPoint said, get out of here. It did.
Well, thanks, Atholl.
Thank you for your
appreciate
attention.
your
It was a
adaptability.
real run through. We'll get rid of that.